Hi again. Right, so this is our first input video on sort of the world of academic writing and understanding and all that kind of stuff, and what goes into developing good academic work, whether that's a written piece, a presentation, whether it's just a way of looking at the world that informs your sort of journey through your degree or your postgrad or whatever it is you're doing. Thank you for all those who took part in the first Doodle poll, and there's been a narrow winner by one single vote, and that's looking at how we know anything and the types of knowledge that you are likely to encounter both on your course, but more specifically for people who are on teacher training courses or in educating courses in any way to do with educating others, having a knowledge and an awareness of the kind of ways people go about knowing things. And it sounds a bit out there, but if you think about teaching in general or education, very often we talk about the sort of curricula that we're examining or going into school and teaching it, or presenting on something or writing about something. And we always assume that people know exactly what we're talking about in the sense of, I'm going to ask students to do something so they can demonstrate their knowledge. But it's rare that we stop and pause and think, okay, well, what kind of knowledge are we talking about, and what kind of knowledge are we generating, and what sort of knowledge are we asking those who we're working with to develop in themselves. And hopefully over this like short little clip, you're going to realize that there's several different ways of knowing anything at all. And while we know this on an intuitive level, for academic work, it's really important to realize that in order to demonstrate something, you need to know it on a range of levels. And there might be one predominant type of knowing there, but there'll be other ways of explaining it as well. And there's lots of theorists you can look at, and this type of knowledge is called epistemology. It's just a fancy word for saying the kinds of things that one can know. And it's a separate branch of philosophy, but in regards pedagogy and education and the education of children, I'm going to break it down into really simple headings. And what I'd like you to do is when we're doing this, is kind of think, okay, what assignments have I been working on? And where do those types of knowledge fit into those assignments? And alongside of that, if you're in a role where you are teaching or working with others and disseminating information to them, what type of knowledge is it that you're asking them to develop? Okay, so while we're talking about this, I want you to sort of actively engage with, okay, what's the answer to both of those questions? So, ways of knowing, well, there's loads and loads of different headings and theories and philosophies behind this, but in broad terms, there's about four, maybe five different types of knowing, okay, or knowledge, so sources of knowledge. So, the first type of knowledge that you will encounter, probably in an academic work, is what's called propositional knowledge. So propositional knowledge is the kind of knowledge you bump into whether you're doing a degree course or whether you're out and about in your everyday life. And simply put, propositional knowledge is facts, facts and figures, and quick bite-sized information. So, for example, if you're at a pub quiz and someone poses you a question and there's one correct answer to that question, very simply, that's propositional knowledge. It's just facts. So quite often you can confuse people who are very good at recall and propositional knowledge as being super well educated or really intelligent. Well, you could argue that, but you could also argue that they've just got a very good memory for short bits of information. So when you think about a national curriculum, there's probably some subjects that you think lend themselves very well to propositional knowledge and others that aren't that so inclined. So you kind of need to think, okay, when you're teaching, okay, is it propositional knowledge? Is it facts and figures that I want recalled, or is it something else? Okay. Now another type of knowledge you can think about is called procedural knowledge. And that kind of does what it sounds like. It's the type of knowledge that you would demonstrate if you wanted to show a how to. So if I was teaching a child how to, I don't know, bake a cake, okay, the procedural knowledge would be the method that they use to carry that out. So it's the procedure that they carry out. So now again, reverting back to the kinds of exams or assignments that you've had to do, or the types of things that you're exposing children in your care to, or if you're working alongside people, what kind of things are you asking them to do to demonstrate knowledge, to show you, to be able to do something, to have a right and a wrong? So procedural knowledge is the how to. Okay, so a good way of joining these two things together is to think of cookery and menus. When you have a menu, very often you have the ingredients. So if I asked you, okay, what ingredients go in an omelette, you could revert back to your propositional knowledge and say, well, eggs are the main ingredient, okay? But then if I said, okay, well, how do you make an omelette? And you went and you showed me and you demonstrated, that would be your procedural knowledge. That's your method. So you've got ingredients, which is the propositional, method, which is the procedural. Okay, so there's two different types. Okay, now the next one that you want to think about is personal knowledge. Now this is where it gets much trickier because this is kind of subjective. So the other two are kind of objective. You can test them quite easily. So if I'm putting an exam where I've got 20 questions and you need to get 18 correct to pass that exam, that's kind of like an exam on proposition knowledge. They're right, wrong answers. Okay, very simply. The other one might be I want you to demonstrate a technique. So I might want you to demonstrate the use of an interactive whiteboard and the resources you can use. So I can test them. I can see how you demonstrate your knowledge and your skill in delivering both of those things. But personal knowledge is subjective. So this is where you would be able to explain what you think and how you think about something from a personal perspective. So that's much trickier. So if you cast your mind back now to the national curriculum, you'll be able to straight away think, okay, there's some subjects that have a lot of proposition knowledge. There's other subjects that have procedural knowledge, but there's not that many subjects that we ask people to demonstrate personal knowledge of. Okay, now the subjects that you would probably find those most prevalent in would be the sort of humanities, so history, geography, religious education, and the arts, so things like drama, music, art, that kind of stuff. Okay, so they have a personal knowledge to them. Now, the last one, which is it's frequently overlooked, but it's really important, that's called tacit knowledge. So the other three are all P's: procedural, propositional, personal. Tacit knowledge is even trickier. So this is the kind of knowledge that you have deeply ingrained in you, where you feel very strongly about it, but it's very hard to put into words. So it's not like personal, where I can say, okay, well, when I went to such and such a place, I felt, a connection with it because, there might be a cultural reference there or historical reference. Okay, that's personal. We can all talk about that, and even though it's subjective, you can kind of share those moments with people. With tacit, it's much trickier because the whole idea of tacit knowledge is that it's so personal that it's difficult to put into words. So, for example, tacit knowledge, you could come across this in regards to political views, where you feel very, very strongly about something and it's difficult to get out. Or it could be spiritual or religious knowledge, where it's so deeply ingrained in who you are as a person that to explain it is, language almost, language hits a limitation. So, tacit knowledge is, I would say when you're looking at the national curriculum, there's very few things that would have tacit knowledge, possibly religious education, possibly music, possibly art, okay, because they are something that resonate deep within. So that's kind of a brief overview of epistemology, or the theory of knowledge. So what I'd like you to do is, once you've watched this video, just have a think about two things. If you're working in schools, what types of knowledge have you been asking children to develop in themselves? And what activities have you been doing to facilitate that? So that's one thing. But also in regards, if you're a university student, the exams and the assignments that you've been doing, what type of knowledge is it asking you to demonstrate? And you might find that it's not neat. It might sort of blur between the two. But I would put a bet on with you that actually, depending on the assignment, there's going to be one type of predominant knowledge that's being asked for. So have a think about those two things. Now, in regards assignments and where you would go for further reading, there's two very, very, very good books. There's one called, rather handily, A Guide Through the Theory of Knowledge. Now, it's not education specific, but it gives you an overall look at it. And that's by a guy called Adam Morton. It's an old book. It's about 10 or 15 years old, but it's a good overview, okay? On tacit knowledge, you can look up a chap called Michael Polanyi, Polanyi, and he talks about tacit knowledge. So I hope that's been helpful. But when you're thinking about your assignments, just think, okay, what am I being asked for right here? And how do I best demonstrate that? And if you're in school teaching, it's worth pausing to think, okay, which type of knowledge is it I'm asking people to demonstrate? And what activities and what support can I give in order for people to be able to develop their knowledge and demonstrate it on a deeper way? So I hope that helps. Doodle polls are still open. I'm still getting lots of requests in, so the next video will probably be in a few days. But as usual, subscribe to the channel, like the channel, give us some feedback. So if you have any requests, put it on the YouTube channel, and hopefully I'll see you soon.